Hi, I'm artist Pam Hamilton. Welcome to my home studio. Today I am painting some tulips on a piece of Sennelier La Carte pastel card. The color is salmon. My sketch is very simplified. I use an app called Notanizer just to get the shapes very simplified. I'm not putting a lot of detail into the sketch, just I worked out a lot of the details ahead of time on how I wanted this cropped. Now I'm going in with a new pastel and a dark color just to basically start getting my darkest darks into place. I'm using it on its side, not using a lot of detail at all, just working quickly just to get those shapes in position. You'll notice I'm toggling back and forth between my no-tan, a grayscale version of my reference photo, and the color. Basically, at this point, I do not want to get trapped by the details of my final reference photo. I just want the values and the very simple shapes. I'm continuing to develop the darkest darks on the three tulips that are making up my main focal point. Here you see me holding up my pastel right next to my reference photo to match color. That for me is the easiest way to determine if I'm at the right, not only the right color, but the right value. Now I'm going in with a really dark red. The dark red is going right over the top of that dark new pastel. You want to have a light enough touch that you can see the dark color underneath the red color. If you go too heavy-handed, you're going to obliterate everything. Part of the beauty of pastels is being able to see all of those beautiful layers. Now I'm very simply stating all of those distant tulips. They kind of connect together, forming a little bit of a band, and that's the way I want it to be. I really want to draw attention to the detail on these main three tulips that are in the foreground. Now I've picked up a mid-range coral and I'm starting to apply the next level of lightness. Typically I work from dark to light. I can't say always, there's exceptions to every rule. Again, I'm matching the color to my reference photo. I so often see my students grab the wrong color. They'll see a yellow tulip and they'll grab a yellow pastel out of the box, but it's not yellow at all, which is why you hold the pastel up to your reference photo and you can see it's, in this case, it's actually more of an olive green. I will eventually apply, well, you can see I've gone a little bit brighter now because that's the lit side of the tulip and the color has changed. I'm still using my pastels on the side at this point. Putting a little bit more weight to one end to get little stronger marks on the edges. Very lightly indicating the distant tulips, keeping the edges very soft to imply that they're further away from the viewer than those three tulips that are my focal point. Now I've introduced a slightly lighter ochre shade that I'm going over the top of that olive. Now I'm warming the base a little bit and adding some of that same olive that I used in the distant background tulips and bringing a little mauve in there and connecting those background shapes. very loosely developing the background. Continuing to match the pastels to my reference photo. I want to talk about the distant background, the sky and the tree area. There were crabapple trees that were in bloom. And when I took the photo, it was one of the things that I thought was so beautiful. And you'll see as I continue to paint that I'm pretty much painting that background literally the way I see in my reference. What I find out later into the process is it wasn't working. So as I'm troubleshooting in my head, I'm continuing to layer on different color temperatures of blue grays and slightly more aqua, and that kind of a is probably a Terry Ludwig eggplant. Now I'm continuing developing the foreground portion of the field of tulips. I'm adding in a little bit more of that really hot red, a little bit of a kind of a rust color, or a little bit of a, it's almost a terracotta. Again, just keeping the distant tulips implied. Skimming a little bit of that canyon terracotta color here and there. Usually once you have a pastel in your hand, you do want to apply it in more than one place. It'll make the whole painting more cohesive. This is where I'm trying to save that background. I go in with a 1.5 inch wide flat brush and I start to brush off and slightly blend out that background, knowing that it wasn't working for me. For now, I'm just letting that background rest to see whether or not it's working. I'm going in with some dark greens and working on carving out the shape of the tulips in the distance. Still using the pastel on its side. Relatively light touch. I don't want to cover up the red of this paper. You can see the shape of that tulip happening as I'm going in with the leaves. I'm going back and forth between the edge of the pastel and the side of the pastel to create leaf shapes. I have two different shades of green, one slightly cooler than the other. Varying the size and shape of my strokes. I've picked up one shade lighter green and I'm layering it over the top of the darker greens. I'm also using it to create stems and continuing to work on my negative areas around the tulips, which is kind of creating that curved shape that tulips have without actually having drawn in the tulips. You can see the two different greens that I'm using. I've gone up another step lighter, and this time I'll be using this kind of mid-range green to create the edges of my leaves. Thick and thin lines, really giving it some visual interest, but again, not covering up all the red of that paper. It's really important that that red continues to show. Now I'm going in and redefining the stems of the tulips, adding a slightly brighter, higher chroma color to that left edge. I'm building up on the leaves with that same slightly brighter green. Going again back and forth between using the tip of it and the side. Lots of back and forth, continuing to carve out the shape of the distant tulips with the leaf color. Now I'm going in with my lightest, brightest green, and I'm creating pretty little edges and little dabs of light. Still trying to make that background work. I've still got that light green in my hand, putting little bits of it here and there. I picked the Terry Ludwig eggplant back up, and I'm putting a little dark value at the base and just behind what I would say would be the mid layer of tulips. Now I'm bringing in my brightest brights for the edges of my tulips. This is a kind of a light peach, and I've also got a red orange or kind of a coral color. Now I'm bringing in a little mauve to indicate that that is the shadowed and cooler side of the tulip. A little bit of it into the yellow tulip as well. You can see I'm constantly matching the pastel to my photo reference. Now we're getting to my favorite parts. This is where I'm adding the pretty little bright highlights and the more bold marks. Also just a little bit of vibrant color, connecting the shapes in the background. Repeating the use of that orange color in multiple places for that cohesive harmony that I was talking about earlier in the video. And here we go with that background again. I'm telling you, it was a real struggle for me. I went back and forth on it so many times. At this stage, I've simplified it quite a bit, and I've brought in a little bit of warmth, knowing that what I had was not working. And here comes that brush again, brushing it all off again because I'm still just not happy with it. So now I go back into the flowers and I refine them a little bit, make sure that I have them exactly the way I want them to be. Again, it's lots of back and forth, making tiny little adjustments, bringing the sky down into the top of the tulips. Here I'm adding just a little higher chroma red. And then adding a little bit of a shadow behind the yellow tulip. Here I'm using a new pastel in a slightly brighter, lighter green. Just add a few surface marks, kind of adjusting the stem color ever so slightly. Now I'm going in with a hard pastel and I'm giving that main tulip a little additional surface texture. And I apologize because I bumped the tripod, so my head is now slightly blocking your views, so I apologize for that. So this was the next morning after I had had time to kind of let the painting ferment and figure out what about the sky I didn't like. And I brushed it off yet again and used a red pastel that was about the same as the salmon color of the paper. Applied some of the red back into the background and then just ever so slightly indicated the blue of the sky and the green foliage in the background. And that is how I left it, and I signed it. In spite of the challenges I had painting the sky in this one, I'm really happy with it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.